Good afternoon. You all are talking so much. You all are talking so much. I want to capture that so that we can all talk together before it starts to die down. So good afternoon. Thank you all so much for coming out today. It's always iffy in the summertime whether or not we're all going to be around to be able to come, and it is wonderful to get a chance to see everybody and for us to get a chance to talk. I think it's a perfect moment to talk about summers as we are feeling it and kind of in it, because it has been feeling like summer this year. For those of you who are new or who are guests, my name is Cindy Gueli. I'm president of AOI this year, and thank you for being willing to participate in what we're doing here. To give you a couple of warnings about number one, what we're doing. Number one, we are filming this. So before you admit to committing anything that might get you arrested or in the newspaper, please be aware of that. And if you do not want to be on the videos or anything, that we're only using them for educational purposes to collect the memories for AOI, for our archives, or possibly to promote something within AOI. But if that makes you uncomfortable, let us know, and we will find an appropriate blue spot to put over your face or to somehow blot you out of the video. But let us know. So be aware that that's happening. And we're doing this today for a couple of reasons. One, to gather and to reminisce, but also to be able to learn more about each other, to learn from each other, as well as being able to collect some snippets of living history about summers in DC. We are DC history, and I think it makes a lot of sense to be able to collect those stories that will otherwise be lost. So hopefully everybody today can start jogging your memory. You are welcome to participate as much or as little. Do not feel pressure. If you just want to sit and listen and get snookered on mimosas, please feel free to do that. Otherwise, we have forms on the table that you can fill out if you didn't already, if you want to take them home and bring them back. But it would also be wonderful for us to collect some memories that maybe you do or don't want to share with the entire group. We would love to be able to learn a little bit more. And on there is a question about whether you might be willing to give a longer interview for any type of oral history that we would like to collect from AOI members. And I think Carl has already said no emphatically, like several times. So eventually we're going to wear him down. But that's not just for him, but it's partly for him that is on there. I'm going to bring up just some categories, some thoughts, some things to jog your memory. I'll go kind of table to table and see if you had answers to some of these questions, but feel free to join in. We only have two rules. One is if you can please say your name as you have the microphone so we know who you are, and the second is to not hog the microphone. We will pull out the vaudeville hook and take you out if you are talking way too long. Otherwise, we are all talkers here, so we want to hear what you have to say. So please feel free to share, to add, to comment, to correct each other, or to add on, especially as it jogs your memory. This is something new for us. We have no idea how it's going to work, so let's dive in and see. And I thought we'd start with something a little. I'm going to step out of the way here, a little more in the recent past, so that we can get ourselves thinking about things. The Derecho, which we all learned that word in 2011, at least I did, I think a lot of us did for the first time, and the earthquake in 2012. Did I get that right? No, earthquake in 2011 and the Derecho in 2012. That 5.8 magnitude earthquake, I think is probably going to maybe be the first. No problem. The music accompaniment. Okay, I'm going to start at that table in the back, put you on the spot, and ask if I have loud enough voices. Oh, that's nice. That is nice. To see if you have if you have memories of the earthquake or the derecho, where you were, what happened, anything surprising?
Hi, I'm Lois West, and I remember the earthquake very vividly because one of the things I was doing at the time was volunteering at the National Society United States Daughters of 1812. And during the bicentennial for the War of 1812, their museum was open to the public on 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. I had a visitor. We were upstairs in a building built in about 1880, standing by the staircase. And it sounded like and felt like someone had a very heavy industrial jackhammer going outside. Pneumatic drill, just awful. And my visitor immediately recognized what it was, got on his cell phone, said, no, it's an earthquake. So he recognized it before I did. But I live up in the Tinley area and am very aware of the damage to the cathedral that's still not yet repaired. And I had, at one point, when I was working for myself as an enrolled agent for IRS representation, I had a client who worked on the stonework for the Washington Monument. So those are my memories.
I'm sorry. I want to say something, but I'm trying to see what Bill is trying to say to me. Okay. Hi, my name is Risa Cole, and I'd like to talk about the earthquake. I was at work, and you have all of these procedures and what you should and shouldn't do in times of an emergency. And with my husband, he always used to drill and us. You do this if it's an earthquake, you do this, you do that, okay. Well, the earthquake, building started to shake. We were on the 10th floor. And, did you say who? I'm sorry. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I was working for part of Homeland Security. It was down on 15th Street, Northwest. And no one knew what it was. Intellectually, I was thinking, okay, if it's that, we're supposed to do this, we're supposed to do that. But something kicks in and it overrides your intellectual understanding. So, and of course my staff, who was with whatever I did, they did. So everybody was saying, well, what should we do? What should we do? I said, okay, I know what I'm doing. I picked up my purse. I headed for the door, and all of my staff, this one particular person said, okay, Risa, okay, everyone, Risa has her purse. It's time to go.
Did anybody think it is D.C.? Did anybody think it was a terrorist attack? You did? Yeah. Anybody? Yeah, Chip.
I'm Chip. Wait a second, Chip. Wait a second.
I'm Chip. I'm a native Washingtonian. And at the time of the earthquake, I was working at the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the old post office next to Union Station. And I remember we were on the 5th floor, and all of a sudden the building shook, and some of my pictures of my cubicle fell down. And I sat there, and what's going on? DC does not have earthquakes, not at all. And then so the building shook again, and I said, I think that is an earthquake. And shortly after that, the management came on and says, we need to evacuate the building, go to, it's on North Capitol, 2 blocks over to, it's a half a street, something like that. And so we went over, we all fed out of the building, and then we went to the street, and we're sitting in the street, and people were looking at this building next to us, which is very tall. And people started worrying, what's going to happen to that? I was trying to calm people down. I said, don't worry, that building is very, very solid. That's train tracks. They can hold a 200-ton locomotive. It's not going to collapse. And I had to go around and repeat that several times. And it helped a little bit. People were starting to calm down. But then on the other side of the street was this modern office building with nothing but glass. And now, what's going to happen to that? I said, well, it's like about 150 feet away from the street. So if it falls down, we'll just scoot over to the other side. And eventually they called us back into the building. But then shortly after that, they said, okay, dismiss, go home. And that worked out very well. It reminded me, I'm going to jump ahead to 9/11 with the planes attacking. And same way, they evacuated us, but we couldn't walk across Union Station. We had to go around the circle. And we saw two friends of ours, close friends, and they couldn't get home because they lived over in Virginia. So I said, well, come on with us. Got back to the house, and it took about 3 martinis before we started to calm down. That's a savior.
I'm Sally Beth Bunbury. I was in Washington on the date of the earthquake, but I must be the only person in the room who missed it because I was on the mall with a friend visiting the Martin Luther King Memorial that had just opened. We walked from the memorial, I think, to Foggy Bottom Metro. And we got on the metro, and there was a murmur, and people were talking, and we were wondering what had happened. Well, during that time, there had been the earthquake. And it wasn't until I got home to my apartment that I realized something had happened. It felt odd, and then things were knocked over on the shelves, on the bookshelves. And I think even to this day I have cracks in the walls of my apartment that probably developed then. But those are my memories of not feeling the earthquake on that day.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jessica Hodge, and actually, I was home alone on that day with my dog. And I think it was afternoon, and I think I was taking a break. I was sitting out on the back side of my house. And an earthquake would never occur to me in the Washington area. I've lived here all my life. An earthquake was the furthest thing from anything I would ever think of. But the dog came into me, and while the dog was coming up close to me, I just felt something strange. I didn't hear a rumble. I don't think I felt anything, but something was strange. So I looked at the dog and I said, I think we'll just go outside. So as we went outside and went around to the front of the house, my neighbors started coming out into the street. So we're all standing there looking at each other, trying to figure out, well, what's happening and why are we all in the street in the middle of the afternoon? And at some point while we were all out there, we began to learn that we were in the midst of an earthquake. But it was a very strange sensation, and nothing in my house was disturbed, fortunately, and I don't think anybody in our neighborhood had anything disturbed either, but it was really an interesting experience.
My name is Judy Hubbard, and I was working for Councilmember Mary Che that day. And we are, as you know, we're on the first floor of the Wilson Building, which is a Renaissance Revival marble building. And even on the first floor, it was shaking. So we did exactly what you're not supposed to do. We all rushed out to Freedom Plaza. Because earlier, we had some sort of drill, emergency drill, and they had told us where the meeting places were. Nobody thought about that. The first thought was, just get out of the building. And of course, Councilmember Che, Mary Che, didn't have her laptop. So somebody was to go back in the building and get her laptop, but they couldn't do that. They were forbidden. So she was there, helpless.
Save the computer. Sacrifice yourself. Loretta, were you going to comment or something? Or Gary? Who's next?
I
Okay, move this way. I was actually donating platelets at the Red Cross on E Street. And I'm lying there in the chair with needles in both arms, and I thought they'd turn the vibrator on in the chair because the chair started moving across the floor, and looking up, the ceiling tiles were like waving. So the phlebotomists, one on each side of me, grab a needle in each hand, jerk them out of my arm and say, Mr. Brown, you got to get out of here. They run out the door, and I'm left there stanching the flow of blood from my arm. get on the Metro bus, and the Metro bus driver says, "What's going on?" I said, "There's an earthquake." He says, "Oh, I felt something. I thought I'd run over somebody on a bicycle."
I'm Winfield Swanson. I live in a building that was built in 1902. I never take the elevator down because I only live on the 4th floor. But I did because I had 2 books to go to the library in the basement. And so I'm going from 4 to B, and all of a sudden, it seems to me that the elevator is going faster down, and there's this loud noise. And by the time I get to the bottom, I'm thinking, I don't care how much it costs, we need a new elevator. And because maintenance is always a big deal in an old building. So I go out of the elevator and around, and the manager comes this way and says, "Oh, I see you felt the earthquake." I did.
My name is Anne Scoffier, and I live on Idaho. Okay. Oh, goodness. My name is Anne Scoffier, and I live on Idaho Avenue, right across Wisconsin from the cathedral. I was at my sink washing vegetables for a dish that I was going to contribute in the evening. And our dog came in. Someone over here had a dog. And he was crying and, turning around and everything. And all of a sudden, it felt like a subway was coming under the ground. It was so loud. And I saw with my own eyes the steeples fall. I saw it at the moment that they did. And I was in total shock. I was frozen. I didn't have any idea what it was. And then, of course, I, like all others, ran outdoors because you have to. And then I understood what had happened. But I'll never, when that question came on the page, it all came back. And our house was built by a guy that was one of the first people. It's a 1913 house, but it's built in reinforced concrete. And I was thinking, because he had built a store like that, and so he built our house in the same way. And we had 2 little cracks, which I have refused to mend because I want to remember. It was awful. And I wasn't here for the derecho.
Oh, wow.
My name is Barbara Bates, and on the day of that earthquake, I was doing research in the National Archives in that wonderful research room they used to have that they don't have anymore. And it, like you said, it felt like a subway going underneath. And I said, "There's no subway under here." And somehow, the person at the desk got the word that it was an earthquake and told us all to go outside, just like you're not supposed to do. I'm also a guide at Anderson House, and I always tell the story in the British drawing room. Way up high, they have 2 Qin Dynasty vases, and I point out they stayed. Not the monument or Washington National.
Right, they didn't survive.
Good afternoon. My name is Cliftine Jones, but Rick was channeling my late dad. Heavenly birthday is Monday, July 24th, so this says Clifton. So my mom made up the name, Cliftine. But so my mom was recuperating at the Madison Hotel at that time, and I happened to go there around lunchtime, and I actually felt the floor go down and up. And the next thing I knew, outside at 15th and M, which was maybe it was close to where your office was, the Homeland Security. Anyway, everyone was on the street. Everybody from the hotel, from the office buildings, and it was. I was like, "What was that?" So fortunately, and that's a strong building too. Fortunately, nothing happened. But I think your idea to have this talk about these occasions was great, and I think Bill and the lady who saw the steeple fall, I don't think any of us can compete to those. Those are 2 best ones. Okay, thank you.
Who else? Someone else before I move on to another topic? It certainly seems like the earthquake was melanated.
The earthquake was, especially because we don't, exactly, nobody expects it here.
My name is Elaine Newman. I was in the Senate office building, and we went through the tunnel, and I didn't know anything about it. Walked back to the metro, got on the metro, and somebody sitting in front of me said, "Did you hear about the earthquake?" We didn't know about it. He said he was evacuated and that we had an earthquake. I guess I got home, Barbara, and I was told about people in the building feeling it, but I didn't feel anything.
I think it was memorable, number one, because it was so out of the ordinary, but for some reason, I don't know if anybody else felt this too. I felt it, and I was like, oh, that's an earthquake. And I don't know why it suddenly occurred to me that it was going to be an earthquake, but it felt exactly like I guess I thought an earthquake should feel like, even though it was incongruous. So that is more recent. Thank you for sharing those, and we're going to get through as many topics as we kind of get through. So feel free if something else comes to you and you want to kind of jump around. That is fine too. But I'm going to go next towards staying cool in the summer. So just as a reminder of how hot DC can get, the hottest it's ever been here is 106, and we hit that twice in recorded history. And 1930 and 1918. But we've all, I believe, lived through a bunch of 105s, 104s, 103s. So it's incredibly hot. When I first saw these pictures, I thought these people were dead in Rock Creek Park. But they are not. They are sleeping in Rock Creek Park, as people often did. Haynes Point, Rock Creek Park, when it got too hot before air conditioning, and would go and use the fountains not just for to jump in and cool off, as well as for it to look pretty, and going into Rock Creek to cool off as well. And I have a couple of others, but these are some examples of what people did. I want to know if you remember life before air conditioning in DC and after air conditioning in DC. And what I know, I see heads shaking, like I don't want to remember that. But sleeping porches, fans, do I have? Yeah, the White House itself, which I hadn't realized, Taft put a sleeping porch on the roof of the White House in 1909, if you can see that. First air conditioning in the White House, Garfield, after he had been shot and then eventually died 80 days later, but while they were trying to treat him badly, which would lead to his death, when he was in the White House, they had a version of air conditioning. So that was kind of the first air conditioning in the White House that did not work. Wet cotton sheets that they put with fans and tried to blow it on there. They wouldn't get air conditioning in the White House until the Truman renovation came in. And Wilson set up a tent in the Rose Garden to work because it got so hot. And this was a leftover tent from Teddy Roosevelt. So very different ways to deal with it. So how did you all deal with it? Sleeping porches are big, certainly big in row houses in DC. Anybody sleep on sleeping porches?
Yeah, I'll tell you something.
Yep.
Here we go. Okay. Sure. Tom Borger, and I'm a guest. We have a number of apartment buildings that date 1900 to 1925. And almost inevitably, if you go down into the bowels of the building, there'd be these giant fans. And the fans had a vent on each floor. And the people had your front door, but you also had a vented, slatted door. And you had, like on the Envoy and some of the other ones that had, also had canopies that went over the windows. So the deal was you open your windows, you put the canopy out to keep the sun out, and you open your door, but you keep the slatted door. And the exhaust fans that run from the basement to the roof created an absolute draft through your apartment, into the corridors, and up to the roof. And we still have in buildings, we don't use them anymore, but we still have the remnants of some of these fans. And decent-sized apartment building, the fan could be 10 feet tall and or in diameter. I mean, they're huge, and they work. So I guess that was the air conditioning in 1920.
at least you lived through it until you got to maybe a fountain or something. But architectural details on many of the houses in apartment buildings, even front porches, awnings, all made to deal with some of the heat before we had air conditioning. Anybody sleep on the front porch or sleeping? Good. Please.
Actually, I didn't go through a transition. My name is Pat Batondo, and I've been in Washington in and out since 1959. It was hot when I came, and it's still hot. And we don't have air conditioning, so I never went through a transition. But my story is, I decided that I was not going to pay taxes until we became a state or had self-rule. So in 2008, I wrote a letter to IRS and told them, I'm not going to pay any taxes. And they never responded, so I never paid. And 2009, 2010, 2011, nothing. And I didn't pay. But 2012, I got a letter. And it happened to be 103 in Washington. And I was really hot without air conditioning. So I was given this number to call at IRS. And I called it, and I wasn't put on hold. She answered right away. So it's one of those important extensions. And she told me what I had to do, and I told her why I didn't. And finally I said, am I going to go to Pennsylvania or West Virginia? And she said, what are you talking about? And I said, to the federal prison, because their air conditioning is so damn hot. And she said, you're not going to go to prison, but you're going to have a lot of paperwork. So that's my story of the heat. It's great.
Did you get that straightened out, or do we need to blot you from the video?
We do not want a repeat performance.
That is awesome.
Jessica Hodge again. My story will not be as good as Pat's, but I grew up in Brookland, on 13th Street to be exact, and when I was a young girl, my parents always changed over the house from winter to summer. So we take down all the drapes, lift up all the rugs, polish the floors, put in lighter drapes, put in slip covers, whatever. Anyway, change the entire house for hot weather. So we would be out playing in the morning with our friends. At noon we'd come in, we'd have lunch, you'd have to take a bath, no showers then. You'd take a bath, you put on clean underwear, and you'd get on your bed. And you would either take a nap, or you would read, or you'd do something for 2 hours of quiet. And when it was quiet, all the shades were drawn so that the sun wouldn't come in and roast you to death. But that's how I spent my childhood days until we moved to the beach in the summers, probably when I was about 10 or 11. But that's how we tried to manage the heat during the summer months.
I remember those swap outs. When my grandparents' awnings went up, when they came out and installed them, the winter rugs got rolled up and went to Bergman's. Not rattan, but the summer, raffia went down and everything. So I'd forgotten that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Loretta Newman. I moved to D.C. I'm from Oklahoma originally. And when I was raised in Oklahoma, the temperature there to be 104, 105 for days and days and days was normal. Okay, and we had ceiling fan and attic fan, and we had fans blowing on us. We had no air conditioning until I was in my teens. When I moved to Washington, I remember people saying how horrible the weather here was, so hot and it was so awful. I said, but it's only 95 degrees. I mean, it's not that bad. What's the problem? I'm used to. And the humidity, I got, that was a little bit more, but we had humidity in Oklahoma too. But my strongest feeling about Washington was in the summer was that it was not that hot.
Coming to you.
Hi, I'm Christina Hutchings, and I'm a guest of Lois West. Happy to be here. And in a way, I was thinking perhaps I came into this world on account of Washington's hot weather. In the summer of 1943, my father, who was a native of Boston, grown up there and gone to college in Maine, came down to Quantico to officers training. And at first he was very excited about putting on the dress uniform and the tunic and I don't know if there was still leather in the neck, but the tight neck, high neck, which was higher in those days, and tighter, he says, and it was wool. The tunic was wool. And anyway, once they were allowed some shore leave, as it was called, to go out on the town, they came, he wasn't so sure, and they got into the district, and somebody heard that there was a tea dance. And a tea dance was a way to meet young ladies between the hours of 5 and 7, and there was tea, there was no liquor. So this was a much more respectable way for a young lady to meet a young man. And they were heavily chaperoned as well. And so my father wasn't quite so sure if this was exactly the shore leave he had in mind. But anyway, the tea dance was being held at the Mount Vernon Junior College for Women. And somebody then said, it's air conditioned. So like a shot. He and his classmates went over to Mount Vernon Junior College, and right there was my mother, who was a native of Washington, and her parents and grandparents who were all natives of Washington. And so one thing led to another. He went off to the Pacific, and 3 years later came back, fortunately. But he said, as a person who had never been south of Hartford, Connecticut in his life, the heat, even without the tunic, was, they just could not comprehend and deal with. And another thing that was very difficult to cope with was Southern accents at that time were, A, one, more prevalent, and two, much thicker. And he, from Boston and Maine, it was like almost, he said, we were speaking two different languages. So that's the story of 1943 in Washington.
That's good.
Could we clarify for the record that Mount Vernon Junior College for Women was the one at Ward Circle, correct? Back then it would have been.
Well,
Am I
1943?
correct? Yes.
It
Would
had
have
already
been-
moved.
It had already moved?
The Navy had taken it over by 1943.
The question was, so Mount Vernon College for Women had originally been at Massachusetts and Nebraska Avenue. The Navy commandeered it and
Yeah.
then moved to Foxhole and
So she was probably taking classes at where Garfinkel's ended up in Spring Valley.
I think it was Garfinkel. I think it was in 1942, the Navy commandeered the campus because it was a beautiful spot, really. That was the real deal. And the girls had to move to Garfinkel's department store.
That had just been built in Spring Valley. It's now Crate and Barrel. on
That's what
on Mass Avenue. And that was a very high spot. So that was the Naval Communications headquarters. And they built the Navy Waves quarters across the street from it. So it was a great area, I'm sure. It was a very active area when she was there.
Judd French and my mother went to Mount Vernon, and she recounted the stories of Garfinkel days and also going to learn etiquette from Marjorie Merriweather Post at her home because they did not have the facilities that they'd had previously.
And she was a graduate Post, as was her daughter was there at the time, if
Right.
I remember, which is, I think, the connection.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Fascinating. I won't tell anybody what we used to call Mount Vernon when I was going to school in D.C. Did anybody else have a nickname for Mount Vernon? That was not an appropriate nickname that, since it was people's mothers who went there, I think we referred to it as Mount Mattress. Did anybody else? Was that not what they knew it as? Strike that from the record. From that. Anybody else run? Oh, Carl. Oh,
I just have a comment.
please.
Christina reminded me of something that I learned at a very early age. And Judd, you may remember, prior to Memorial Day, many, many decades back, they used to get young men from the Metropolitan Police Boys Club, and we would place poppies on the graves at Arlington. But one year, we were given a tour of the back room. Do you know, and until very recent times, that those that walked the tomb wore wool year-round? Only in recent times have they come up with a material that was well enough. The shoes that they wore were the insulated shoes to protect them. So, yeah, that was their summer. And they wore wool. And there was a reason for it. Does anyone know the reason? Wool would hold a press. Wool would hold the press, and that's why they were required to wear wool all year.
Wow. Ouch. Anybody else go? Oh, did you have? Please.
My name is Anne Scoffier again, and I just can't resist. You know that, here, okay, I'm sorry. I'm remembering that a lot of people, if you were from a home where the mother was from New Hampshire and the father was from Mississippi, he was fine. He didn't think it was bad at all. My mother was dying. So she, at the end of the day after school ended, we were in the car on the way to New Hampshire. So when you ask that question, I keep remembering, I hadn't seen Washington in the summer as a very young child. When we got older, we got a house at the beach, but we always went to New Hampshire. My mother could not stand it. And I think that there were a lot of families, you know, in the olden days when moms didn't work and things, that may have been like that. I don't have any memories as a young person of Washington in the summer. Except it got hot in June, of course.
So does that, one of the ways to go, please.
Hi, I'm Risa Cole, and it's not a real long story, but it's something, sometimes things will just stick in your mind as you're a child growing up and you'll remember it. One of the things that I thought was enjoyable during the summer, because we didn't have air conditioning, but on the very, very hot nights, we would all, the whole family, would sleep downstairs in the living room. The doors would be open, the windows would be open. To me, that was like going camping, and I just looked forward to that. And I think I was probably the only one, but I always remember that.
Judy Hubbard, I'm surprised nobody worked for the federal government then. I had a summer job in the federal government, and when it got a certain degree, it was too hot, the federal government shut down. You remember that? Yeah. I wondered when air conditioning, I'm sure air conditioning came slowly to certain agencies. I'm sure I was one of the last. I worked for the Controller of the Currency across the street from the Bureau of Engraving. So somehow I feel that we were not at the top of the list for air conditioning. But others must have remembered when the federal government literally just shut down. You couldn't work in that heat. And of course, it was a hardship for foreign service officers. Yeah.
The British gave their diplomats hardship pay for summers that they spent in D.C. Many of the European embassies did that.
Well, on the mall, when they had the tempos that were still there and they were not air conditioning, they would pass out salt tablets so that you could stay on your feet during the summers.
The Library of Congress was one of...
Introduce yourself, Tom.
Tom Neal, past president. The Library of Congress, where I still work, but I didn't work at this point, was one of the last major federal buildings to be air conditioned because it was a big old Victorian pile. And it had actually been designed with huge windows, and the offices all had like doors that like you would see on a Western saloon in the movies, because they had a big oak door and then they had the door that let the air through. But and the stacks were all had windows, and so there was natural ventilation. But the staff would send around somebody with a thermometer, and when the temperature in the stacks reached 108 degrees, the Library of Congress would close because the deck attendants would start to die of heat stroke if they didn't.
That seems wise.
It seems to be a hot topic.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Heather McCabe, and I was born at Garfield Hospital. And all I remember about being a child was my father had a Packard convertible, and we would drive, I don't know if you remember, the road that went to National Airport, which was T90 at the time, had these little bumps in it, and my father would call them thank you ma'ams. Yeah, and he would put the top down on the Packard convertible, and we would stand up in the back seat, my brothers and I, well, that was then, not now, and we would go over those and just laugh our full heads off. He thought it was great fun, but we'd also get the breeze. But what I really remember was my father, who was an engineer, and also taught at Howard University. He had a private practice. He taught at Howard in engineering with Dr. Davis. And I remember him saying at cocktails one night, which was the tradition of our family, we all got together before dinner. And I remember him saying to my mother, who was a pediatrician here for 53 years, saying, Thistle, I don't know what's going to happen to this city. Pardon my English, but this is my father. They're putting in GD air conditioning in Congress and in the federal buildings. When are these going to leave town and leave us alone?
It's really Barbara.
Barbara Bates again. I guess I was a teenager. I didn't live here then, but we lived nearby, and we came into Washington for the day, and we were visiting the Army Medical Museum down on the mall. I couldn't believe how hot it was. It was during the summer, and it was not air conditioned. So I assume the other Smithsonians weren't either.
Okay, lightning round, since we're talking about heat. Best ice cream to cool off during the summer? Giffords. Okay, that's unanimous. Giffords. Giffords is the ice cream. Pamela, did you? Yeah. Briars. Polar bear. Frozen custard. The treat. I think Bill. I think Pamela.
This is going back to heat, but on the USAID the Foreign Service State Department, I came to Washington in 1979 to work at USAID, and the Camp David Peace Accords had been signed, and with a big assistance program to Cairo. Well, I quickly learned that you could get out of town and go on TDY to Cairo, and it was so much cooler and drier than Washington.
That's awesome. Well, I'm gonna change topics and go But I'm going to go to fireworks. But first, I wanted to make sure that, because I think this predates all of us here, if you didn't know that the tidal basin at one point was a beach. And so these are just some, I think there's such great photographs. And they started in 1891 by creating, when they were dredging up the land to create Haynes Point and to reclaim some of that land. So there were versions of the beaches since 1891. These are all in 1920. They did initially, it was men only initially, so they did have certain days for women for modesty's sake. And then that got mixed as the decades went on. And at some point they were not segregated, then at some point they were segregated. And in the 1920s, Congress earmarked some money so they could create 2 separate beaches. That was approved, but before they could start building it, people, I guess, thought twice about it and decided that instead of having an integrated beach and instead of having 2 separate beaches, they were just going to close the beach down completely altogether. And so it didn't last past 1925. But they did have bathing houses, and they did have swimming lessons, and they did have sand, so you could actually go on the beach. And the first beach was where the Jefferson Memorial now is. But I just think those are fabulous pictures.
You can see, if you go back to the photo in the upper right-hand corner, that's the engraving and printing.
Yes, in the back,
so
exactly.
I mean, those girls are really right on the location of the Jefferson Memorial.
Yes. Yep. Is that, are you asking what he was talking about? The engraving and printing building. That's right there. So they really are where the Jefferson Memorial currently sits. Yes, Carl.
I just have a question. Does anyone know why the police would have been stationed in this area and policemen with tape measures? Does anyone know? There you are. The length of the bathing suits. There were actually officers from MPD who had tape measures. And one of the things that their responsibility was to measure the length of the ladies' bathing wear. Because DC had a law where there had to be X number of inches, not to exceed X number of inches above the kneecap.
Well, and actually, in these pictures, they're pretty high for that. So they had to give you at least some room in there, which is pretty good. But it looks like a lot of fun. I'm sorry we can't. I know we're going back to being able to swim in some of the rivers here, but